Let's begin reciting the Surah Fatiha and ask Allah to give the thawab to all of the marhumin, the deceased from our family, our communities, our friends, the ulama, the shuhada. Surah Mubarakatul Fatiha, please. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم إلى الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam al-Hujjah, one loud salawat upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. This evening, as we know, we have a special program. And really, anytime we get together to commemorate the Ahlul Bayt is nothing special about it because they themselves are special. And us having this opportunity is just a way for us to gain extra reward from Allah, to remember their musibah, to remember their tragedies, and to learn from the teachings of Ali Muhammad alayhi wassalam. And ultimately, as we know that is the real reason why they came, why they served, why they were killed in the way of Allah, is for us to be able to learn lessons from their life, for us to be able to learn teachings from their own examples, and to be able to gain insight into our own lives through reflecting on all of their experiences, tribulations, and tragedies, and the words of wisdom. This evening, I want to continue in our discussion that we had begun a few nights ago, for those who recall when we marked the martyrdom anniversary of our second Imam, Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Mujtaba, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We spoke about what was termed as personal politics, and we mentioned, for those who weren't here or for those who forgot what we talked about last week, we were looking at this topic of personal politics, about how do we as human beings, how do we interact with the world around us. We talked about the fact that all of us, whether we like it or not, we are all embroiled in one form of politics or another. We mentioned that politics does not always have to be dirty. It doesn't have to be what we saw south of the border in this last few months leading up to their elections, with names and insults being thrown back and forth. Politics is obviously how we deal with one another. And you can either deal with one another, as we had seen in the American elections, that form of nasty politics, or you have the politics of the likes of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, who ultimately, as we know, he was a politician in the positive sense, because he had to deal with people, the likes of the cursed Muawiyah, Mal'un, and people who were worse than him. And he obviously used politics in the way that would get a point across, that would be the preservation of Islam. Obviously for you and I, we're not at that level probably. We have our own issues to deal with. And so in the hadith that we looked at, we talked about how Imam Hassan alayhi salam had divided politics, our interaction, how you and I interact with the world around us, at 3 levels. When he was asked by a man, define siyasa, politics, Imam Mujtaba alayhi salam had said, politics is how, one, you deal with Allah. What is our relationship vis-a-vis Allah, our Creator? How do we interact with Allah? Number 2, he said, is how you deal with the hukukul ahya, the living, the people who are alive that we interact with. And we looked at 2 of the 4 aspects in our last discussion. about how we have to give the rights to our brothers and sisters. We talked about how the sixth Imam has said in a hadith when he was asked, how many rights does one Muslim have over the other? And the sixth Imam said, Sab'una haqqan, 70 rights one believer has over the other. We also talked about the second right of the believer, of the living, which was that we should never stop serving our communities, right? That we as believers, we have to continuously be servants of our own communities, our religious institutions first and foremost. And from here I want to continue in the rest of the hadith this evening, where Imam Mujtaba alayhi salam has two more pieces of advice for how we need to work with the living within our community. And keep in mind, when I use this term, the living, I want to specifically realize that we're looking at believers. Although, as we mentioned, that we as Muslims, as followers of Ahlul Bayt, we believe that we also have to interact with non-Muslims in a specific fashion. We have a level of respect we have to show them as well. But as we talked about in our last discussion, that a believer, we have certain rights and responsibilities over one another which surpass that of the non-Muslim community. So our discussion even tonight, the 2 points will revolve around our rights vis-a-vis the believing community, the believing mu'mineen, the believers. And also we'll try to conclude the hadith by looking at what he calls hukukul amwat, the rights of the deceased. And it sounds a bit strange if you think about it. What do you mean the dead have rights over us? Yes, even those who have passed away, those who are no longer with us, they also have a right over us. They have certain things that we have to ensure that we give to them. And inshallah, we'll try to disseminate the rest of this hadith and hopefully get a better picture of how our interaction should be with one another, both the living and also the dead. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The third point in this hadith, which is the first point of tonight, when we're talking about our responsibility within the community, within our religious society, as the second Imam says, he says that you deal with your leaders, your leader with truthfulness and sincerity, just as he deals with his community in the same way. This obviously is a huge topic. If you want to look at management, governance of a society, of a community. Obviously, we don't have an Islamic government here that we could analyze it from that aspect. But we have something close to that with these institutions that we have established around the world. We have these religious institutions that run by committees. There are people who are elected. They run for a term. They govern our society, our religious society. They ensure that our programs, our centers are maintained, and all of the other things that happen behind the scenes that many of us perhaps take for granted. And if you look at what Islam says, and this is something that many times people ask, especially the youth, that we always say that Islam is a universal religion. I'm sure we've heard this before. We say when Allah talks about in the Quran, Inna deen inda Allahil Islam, indeed this deen, this way of life with Allah is al-Islam, that sometimes we say, well, not sometimes, many times we say that Islam has guidance in every aspect of life. I'm sure we've heard this before, and so we'll propagate economic theories that Islam has pushed forward, social theories, political ideologies, and even in the sphere of management, of governance, of how to be an ideal Muslim manager. Even there the Ahlul Bayt, even there Rasulullah, even there Allah have not left us in the blind. We don't necessarily have to go to the local bookstore to find out about how you should be a good moral manager, to how to be an administrator. Yes, you can refer to those books, but we have books within the Islamic tradition on management within the Islamic teachings. And in fact, if you look at it, Rasulullah, that was his whole goal, was to change society, change their mindset, change everything about how they lived. Rasulullah did not just come to teach you how to pray, how to make wudu, how to do istibra, how to go to the bathroom. Those were there, definitely. But at the ultimate goal of Rasulullah's life was to transform the entire society. It was to replace everything that did not have a tint or a fragrance of Islam, to bring Islam into that. And when it came to management, he did the exact same thing, whether it be appointment of him of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Even when he would be away for a short time, Rasulullah would appoint a leader for the community. And if you want to know the best, details or letters on governance, simply go to the letter that Amir al-Mu'mineen writes to Malik al-Ashtar when he sends him as his governor to Egypt. A document which is so powerful that when Kofi Annan was the head of the United Nations, he actually advised the Arab governments of his time, and this is going back only 10 to 13 years ago. He actually advised the Arab regimes that if you want to get on the right path of running your countries, he actually recommended the letter of Amir al-Mu'mineen to them. He recommended them to refer to Imam Ali. Now obviously they have a hatred, most of them unfortunately we know, for Amir al-Mu'mineen, although he's their fourth Khalifa, but we know what level that they unfortunately put him at. So I'm sure it hurt them to hear that. But for us, that shows us that his letter of governance has the complete blueprint of how to run a civil society. And as the second Imam says in this hadith, he shows us that governance, that leadership, running a community is a two-sided affair. It's never a one-way street. And that's why the Imam says that ensure that we, the subjects, that we deal with our leadership with truthfulness and sincerity, just as we want them to run and maintain the reins of our society. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And this obviously becomes a challenge because many times leadership is something which is thrusted upon individuals. Many times people are not geared or trained or educated to become leaders of a community, of a society. It's not like in politics where people become, city councilors and then they go to provincial, then they make it to federal. Well, except in the American politics where you can become a president by being a movie star or a television star. But most times that doesn't happen in the world. People are groomed from day one, literally, when they're maybe, young children, that their parents are grooming them to be a certain position. But in Islam, we see that in a way that this grooming is there, but at the same time, as the hadith shows, I don't want to go into too much detail, you can refer to books on this topic. We also see that the opposite also becomes true, where the hadith tell us that those who vie and compete in a negative way to attain power, the hadith actually tell us to work the opposite way, to reject those individuals that are competing in a negative way for authority. But ultimately what we see is once a person attains that level of authority of a community, is the believers, whether they have elected or voted or not, if they haven't voted that person, that candidate, ultimately we have to realize that we are going down a path and that the individual will definitely not see eye to eye with each and every one of us in what our thoughts and our visions of a community should be. But that's where we have to realize, as Imam Mujtaba says, alayhi salam, that we deal with that leader with truthfulness, that we're honest with them. If we see something wrong in a community, we have a few options. One is that we go on Twitter or Facebook and start insulting that individual, as unfortunately many times we see happening, where people are defamed, our leaders are mocked, our community leaders are taunted and insulted. Or we can go to that person personally, face to face, in private, and talk to them and explain our point of view. They may change their understanding. They may change what they're planning to do. And they might not, because we're just one voice in maybe 500 in a community. But ultimately, as we see, is that once a leader is elected, the community has to rally behind that individual. Work sincerely for the sake of the community. Be honest with that individual. Be sincere in our advice. And ensure that whatever is best for the community is what is done for the sake of the community. And we see this even in the Quran. This is just one example of one verse that we have, in which we see that we have to be people of principle and morality and morals. Allah addresses you and I. He says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. This is a specific, a unique call in the Quran. When we see these sorts of verses, we should stop for a minute, because this kind of a verse is talking to you and I directly. Allah sometimes says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O humanity. It's a general call. Muslim, Christian, Jew, atheist, agnostic, all of us get put into that lump. Sometimes Allah says, Ya ahlul kitab, O people of the book. But here Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So this means that you and I, when we read this verse, we need to stop and say, what does Allah want to say to me directly as a believer? What is Allah, why does He want to address me now specifically? And here what does He say? He says, O you who believe, kunu kawamina bil qist. Be people who are standing firm for justice. Be people of justice. Be people who are balanced. Be people who are on a firm principle. And He makes it clear that justice is blind, meaning that just because my brother is there and he's doing something wrong, that doesn't mean that I turn a blind eye because he's my brother. And Allah says, as you can see in the verse, even if justice means you go against your own self, that you have to critique yourself, then we have to do that. Justice means that I'm even fair to myself first and foremost. I look at what I'm doing and I weigh that against the book of Allah and the seerah of the Prophet and the Imams, alayhimus salam. And if there's some difference, there's some dichotomy between them, I don't try and justify and rationalize my own ineptitude, my own, what I want to do for my benefit. I say no, that the thoughts I have are here, the Ahlul Bayt are here. Justice will dictate that I humble myself and I follow the Ahlul Bayt, even though it's against my own thoughts. Allah doesn't stop there. He says, even if your own parents are there. And sometimes we have this, that the parents are saying something and a person is saying something else. But as Allah says, that justice has to be maintained even within our own family. Justice can't be sold and just given away because the other person is my brother or this is my sister and we're on the same executive committee together. And because my sister said it, or my brother, or my father, or my uncle, I can't say anything to them because they're my elder or they're a family member. No, justice means even a family member can be critiqued. Justice means that even if a family member says something and it goes against the norms of the religion, that they have to be called out on that. Allah tells us that there's no formalities when it comes to justice. It has to be implemented no matter who the other side is. No matter who the other side is. And this is clear even from the life of the prophets and the Imams alayhimus salam, that they didn't let family get in the middle of how to run a society. They didn't let family get in the way of running a community. Because ultimately it's not about one or two people, it's everybody who are moving together. Those of us who are working, those of us who are struggling to reach the dhuhur of the Imam. It's all about justice and implementing justice. And as we know that the Imam's return, one of the key factors of his return will be to establish that justice amongst society, which would have been removed. It would have been completely annihilated before the dhuhur of our 12th Imam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The second point, which is the fourth in the hadith of the Imam, is again on dealing with those within our community. And at this level, he talks about how to deal with one another. And he shows us that when it comes to guidance, as he says that you work to guide your people back to the straight path when you see them slipping from that path of Islam. We live in an era, not only here in Canada, but really throughout the world. This has unfortunately become a phenomenon where we live in a society where we are very individualistic. We don't like people to point out when we make mistakes in our life. Right? We have this concept of live and let live. If I'm committing a sin, who are you to come and tell me that I'm doing something wrong? If I'm committing whatever heinous actions, who are you as a person to tell me that I'm a free person, that I can't do what I want. We've built up this, and I say this, it's not only here in North America. This is a global phenomenon, where even if you go to Muslim-dominated countries, and I've read about this firsthand in newspapers, where a person would go try to do amal bil ma'ruf, to encourage the good, and they've actually been killed by another believer, by another follower of Ahlul Bayt. In the month of Ramadan, they've killed somebody because of the fact that that person encouraged them towards goodness, and they took it the wrong way, and they took out their aggression and anger and violence on an individual. Now that's an extreme case where you've killed somebody. But in our cases, we probably don't get to that level. But what we do is we'll put up these barriers in front of us. We have all of these beautiful terms that we live in a democratic country. We're free to do what we want to do. Nobody can tell me if I want to go to the bar or the nightclub. You can't tell me what to do. Don't, lecture me. Sometimes our youth will tell their parents, don't give me a lecture of what I should be doing and I shouldn't be doing. I know I should pray. Don't tell me what to do. And unfortunately, we get caught up in that rut where we get to that point where we as a community also develop that same attitude that, they're right. We live in a society, we can't tell people what to do, right? It's free. We're free to do as we want. And yes, we're free, definitely. Nobody can tell somebody to do anything, even within the religious sphere. You can't force somebody to submit to Allah. You can't force somebody to pray. You can't force somebody to do any of these actions. I mean, you can force them to do them physically. Yes, they'll stand and pray with you, but the heart won't be there, right? And if the heart isn't there, if they're not connecting to Allah at that heart level, then what benefit is the action? That doesn't mean you leave them alone. That means that we as a community, because we know that Amal bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar are a part of the Furu'a Deen. They're one of the obligations we have. So we can't say, well, we live in a society where it's inconvenient, so I'm not going to do it. No, we still have to encourage towards good. We still have to encourage people to perform what is right. We can't force, we can't compel, but we can encourage. We can teach the children especially, encourage them, show them the benefits of why and what Islam has put into place, and that we help one another to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately, this is even what the Quran speaks about. When Allah talks about encouraging one another, He says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. He says, help one another, assist one another in goodness and piety, and don't help one another in committing sins and transgressions. So it's not about forcing somebody. It's not about compelling them. It's about helping one another. Just as we would help somebody who is, got a flat tire on the side of the road and they're in the middle of the night and they need help, we would stop to help them. We have to help one another. But obviously helping means that we have to know the ways of helping. And again, I don't want to go into that because that's an entirely different discussion. Because sometimes, and I'll mention this one point though, that sometimes when we get a bit of a zeal in religion, we become the haram police. We go around pointing, haram, 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 haram. This is haram, that's haram. Your hijab is wrong, your prayers are wrong, this is wrong, your beard is too short. This is wrong, we become ultra radical. And we can't be at that level either. We have to take it easy with one another. We have to encourage one another. Encouragement means what? That you don't point fingers at the person and say, you're wrong. You're going to hell because you did this wrong. That's not encouragement. Actually, that would dissuade somebody. That would turn somebody off from even wanting to come back and follow the religion. And so we don't point the finger. We don't critique people like that. We have to be easy with them. We have to be in a rational way. We have to be very calm. We have to use words and language that would get the point across. And just study the books of your marja. And you look when he talks about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar, an entire chapter of the Risala is dedicated to this. It's important to read because sometimes, again, we get overzealous and we want to do things in an incorrect fashion. But when we see the way that the ulama describe the methodology to use, or you look at the ayat of the Quran and how Allah uses terminologies, you'll see that it's a completely different way than having these haram police running around, pointing fingers at people. We have to be at a very level head. We have to do it in a way that would hopefully get the point across. And again, we see this in so many of the examples of the life of the Imams, even alayhim salam, that they would use these methodologies of encouraging the good, of teaching religion, but in ways that would be acceptable to the other party. And let me just end this portion with a hadith of Rasulullah, a very famous hadith that is mentioned by all Muslims, where Rasulullah says that كُلُّكُمْ رَاءٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ, that each and every one of you is a shepherd, and each and every one of you is responsible for your flock. Maybe some of you are teachers in the madrasa system. Wherever you teach in whatever madrasa, you have a responsibility to children that you are nurturing, to ensure that you're bringing them up on the morals and values of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Obviously, you have to do it in the best possible way. Maybe you're not a madrasa teacher, but you're a parent at home. Maybe you have children, grandchildren. You are responsible for them in that way that they're within your family structure. So you have to deal with them in a way that would be acceptable and the way that would be, respecting them as individuals. Ultimately, as Rasulullah says, that each of us is a shepherd. We're all responsible for somebody, whether it be our children, maybe our grandchildren, maybe our students in madrasa. At whatever level we're at, we all have somebody that we can help and teach and guide and encourage to either come back to the path of Islam, to become more committed to the path of the followings of Ahlul Bayt, or to bring them if they've completely left that path. That this becomes their obligation on all of us to do whatever it is that we can do to keep them on that path, or to bring them back to the path of Ala Muhammad alayhim salatu wassalam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The last part of the hadith, where the Imam looks at the deceased and what rights we have over the people who are now left us. He gives us two responsibilities of the dead. He says, as for the rights of the dead, they are that you remember their good actions and that you overlook their transgressions. When anybody dies, obviously once a believer leaves this world, they have no way to defend themselves. When a person is gone, everything is hopefully closed in terms of their records, in terms of their bad actions. And as believers, we're expected to forgive them. And you'll see this happening as a custom in our tradition, that whenever there's a funeral, the family member will stand in front of the audience and he'll ask on behalf of the deceased that if my father, if my mother, if my brother, my sister, whoever the deceased is, if they committed any acts against you, forgive them. If they have any debts which they owed you, come and we'll pay and we'll sort that debt out. If there's any differences between the two, let's come and forgive one another. This is a concept that should also be there in life, not that just when a person dies, we remember their goodness, or we don't talk about them in a negative way. Even when they're alive, we should maintain this. But when the person dies, it's even of greater importance, because now they're not alive here to defend themselves. If we talk bad about them, then they're not here to defend and say, oh, I didn't do that. I wasn't there when this happened. And this can be understood at multiple levels. One is obviously at their actions. If we know something about the marhum, the deceased person, we should keep our mouth quiet. We shouldn't speak about them in a negative way. And I'll share a beautiful line after this. But we have to give that respect to the deceased also from our communities at many fronts. One of the things that also we have to keep in mind, especially those who are responsible in charge of burying the deceased. We have a process within Islam. As believers, we know that we perform the burial in a unique way. We have a team of people who will come, the volunteers, who will come and give the ghusl to the body. A group of people will come and give the kafan. And this also becomes a very sensitive time. Not only don't talk bad about a person and their actions after they're dead, but when you're giving the ghusl, Think about this, that that dead person, that body in front of you, is perhaps in the most unique position ever, from the time they came into this world, because they don't have a soul in their body anymore. Their body literally is at your disposal to do whatever it is you want. And it's open for everybody who's there doing the ghusl to see. Right? That body which was covered with clothing is now bare, obviously with exception of the private parts, for that person who performs the ghusl to see. And maybe that person had cuts or bumps or bruises or scrapes on their body, or maybe they were physically abused, or maybe they had tattoos on their body, or they had piercings on their body. And for people who do the ghusl to come out and then tell people, you know what, we did the ghusl of this person, this lady, and guess what she had on her body? She had this and that, she had bruises, she must have been abused. And sometimes you hear these people talk about it after the ghusl. They talk about the state of the body. This, as we know, is haram. It's not that it's makruh, this is forbidden. You are given a trust. You are preparing this person. Imagine you have the honor of preparing a body to go back to Allah. What an honor that is. It's so much that it's haram to even charge money for the ghusl. You can't even charge for it. It may take you a whole day to do all the services. And for those people who have been involved in the ghusls and the kafan and the burial, you know that people are here in the centers from the time that the body arrives, even before that, when the call is made from the family that a family member died. People are on the go for 8, 10, 12, 14, 18, 24 hours until that body is put back into the earth to return back to Allah. So when you have that honor to give the ghusl, it's haram for you to go and talk and tell people what you saw on the body. And the kafan as well. People who are doing the kafan, they wrap the body and then they go and tell people, the body was in this condition and this was happening to it and I saw this happen. This is also is forbidden in our religion. We don't talk about a believer when they're alive, and surely not when they're dead. We don't have a right to do that as believers. And this is something we have to definitely keep in mind if we're on those committees. If we are in any way responsible for the burial rights of a fellow believer, we have to be careful that we protect that amanat, that we don't spread anything about that individual. Keep in mind that that person who's on that plank that we're washing, tomorrow that might be you. And you or I would not like for people to talk about us and say, oh, that person, they had this problem and this defect on their body. We wouldn't want that to happen. And so we have to be careful as believers that when we are charged with that responsibility, that we protect that deceased man or woman, that we don't let people know about anything other than goodness about them. And let me end with this part, because this is a beautiful line of the namaz al-mayyit. When we gather and we make that salatul mayyit, this is one of the du'as that we recite, and hopefully we've read this translation, and hopefully we've thought about it. It's such a profound thing that we say when we stand in front of that body, and we make those takbirat, and we make that short dua after every takbir. In one of those we say the following, we say, Allahumma la na'lamu minhu illa khair. Oh Allah, I know nothing of this dead body in front of me except for khair, except for goodness. Maybe they were an alcoholic. Maybe it's possible. But still we testify, we know nothing about that person except for goodness. Maybe they did tawbah, I don't know. Maybe that person was whatever they were, but when we testify, when we pray over their body, we say to Allah, we know nothing of that person except for goodness. And then we say, وَأَنْتَ أَعْلَمُ بِهِ minna. Allah, you know better than I do about that person. Because tawbah can be done. Istighfar can easily be done by you and I, and we don't know when somebody asks for tawbah. Only Allah knows that. And so we say, Allahumma in kana muhsanan fizid fi ihsanihi. Oh Allah, if this person was a good person, increase them in their goodness. وَإِن كَانَ مُسِيًّا فَتَجَاوَزْ عَنْ. And if they were a sinner, then overlook those mistakes. Right? This is something all of us recite in the namaz al-mayyit religiously. We all say this line, that we know nothing but goodness of this person who is in front of us. And again, keep in mind that one day that will be us, that will be me in that coffin. And somebody will be standing there making that same dua. And we have to, again, keep in mind that this is a right of the deceased, that we don't think bad about them. They may have been bad, very well. They may have been sinners. But weren't we all sinners at one time? Weren't we all people who did something wrong? Unless you're the 14 Masumin, we all have sinned in some way or another. But if we were to hold that grudge even after death, then life in our own communities become very difficult to live. Because people will say, well, why should I go to that janazah, to that funeral? That guy was a sinner. That lady, she didn't do her wajibat. Why should I go and pray namaz al-mayit? But we have to give, and I've talked about this in the past, benefit of the doubt, husna dhan. That person may have asked forgiveness, we don't know. We have to be those who are giving the people the benefit of the doubt, especially our community. Whatever we are, whatever bad we've done, we have to realize that we have to ask one another for forgiveness. If not in life, definitely when we have left this world, that we ask one another to pray for the departed. And then the second Imam ends this hadith, and he says that, why should you act like this? Why should you deal with the living, with the dead? Why should we have this kind of a outlook on life for everybody? He says, because everybody has a Lord, a Rabb, and that Lord will take account of that person. Allah is the best of accounters. Allah is the best of accountants. Allah will weigh every single action. He won't remove the good, and He won't necessarily neglect the bad. As we even see in the Quran, Allah tells us that whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of evil will also see the repercussions of that action. And so we have to realize, as we live in a community, as we live in a society, that yes, we have to deal with one another, and sometimes it becomes difficult. But we have to realize, as Imam Mujtaba alayhi salam says, is that we deal with people at a level where we realize that they will be accountable to Allah. That every one of us has our book of actions with Allah, and that we will be accountable to Allah on the Day of Judgment, and that we will have to stand in front of our Creator and be accountable for our actions. And so this, hopefully in a nutshell, over these last two sessions, gives us one understanding from the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, from our second Imam, of the rights of Allah, that we have to worship Allah. The rights of the living, that all of those who are believers, we have rights that we have to give to them, that we have to respect our fellow believers, we have to wish the best for them, we have to help one another out in getting closer to Allah. We have to respect our leadership. We have to guide and counsel them when they maybe make mistakes, because none of us are perfect. We have to talk to them rather than talking about them. Talk to our leaders, don't talk about them. Don't say one thing to their face and then go home and talk to your spouse and curse that leader out. Don't say one thing in the majlis and then go on Twitter and blast that individual. Don't be that. Let's be people who can talk to one another. Be upfront with one another in a respectful fashion. Be those who can help the community grow and prosper and move forward. Because if we expect our 12th Imam, and we all make that dua, we always say, Ajjalallahumma farajak, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraju, may Allah hasten His return. But sometimes I myself wonder, do I mean that? Do I really want the Imam's return to come quick? When I'm told that the Imam will establish justice, but I'm not being just with my leaders in my community, what kind of Imam am I looking for? When I ask the Imam to hurry up and return, but I can't work with my own leaders and my own organizations, I backstab them, then how do I expect my Imam to return? Maybe I'll, na'udhu billah, backstab the Imam, just as we saw the people of the Imams, our 12 Imams, do to them. And so we have to be sincere when we make that dua to Allah. We have to truly want the return of our Imam to come. But that means we as believers, it's on our shoulders. We bear the onus of the responsibility of paving the groundwork for the return of our 12th Imam. And that comes first and foremost from a change in our character and how we deal with the living, how we deal with the marhumin, the deceased from our communities. And when we are able to do this, when we're able to give everybody their rights, then inshallah that will be the day that the Imam's duhur will take place. And we will be there to be able to see the duhur of our Imam. And we'll be there to walk to the city of Mecca and to be there to help and assist the Imam, men and women all together, because the women will also be a part of that revolution. The women will also be with the Imam. And if we want that zuhur to take place and we want it to be sped up, then that means we also have to speed up the change of our own character and the way that we work and interact with one another. And as we close, we remember the tragedy of Karbala. Because without a doubt, had it not been for Karbala, had it not been for the sacrifice of Abu Abdullah on the day of Ashura, we would truly have not had Islam today. We would not have Islam as a religion today. But as Imam Hussein alayhi salam gave his life on the day of Ashura, and not only Imam Hussein alayhi salam, these days and nights that we're going through, these days and nights of Lady Zainab alayhi salam, these nights that we dedicate to the tribulation of the ladies and the children of the caravan, had it not been for their sacrifice, had it not been for the difficulties that they faced after the day of Ashura, had it not been for them persevering and working to continue the legacy of Sayyid al-Shuhada, we would not have Islam as a religion today, brothers and sisters. Let me take us back for the last few minutes to what happened after the tragic events of Karbala. We know that as Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, as he had been killed on the day of Ashura, that the family of the Ahlul Bayt, they had no peace even on that day. As we had been recounting over the last few majalis, that the caravan had finally reached to Damascus. They had reached to the palace of the cursed Yazid. Eventually, after Bibi Sakina alayhi salam, after she loses her life in the darbar of Yazid, in the prisons of Yazid, eventually after some time, the cursed Yazid gives the permission of the Ahlul Bayt. He gives them permission to go back home to Medina. And this is what this Arba'een is all about, brothers and sisters. This is why even today you see millions upon millions of people who are walking, not only from Najaf to Karbala, but as you see the video footage, people are walking from Basra hundreds and hundreds of kilometers towards Karbala. People are walking from Iran thousands of kilometers towards Abu Abdullah. And this is that same painful journey that Lady Zainab alayhi salam, that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, that the women and the family members also were taking in these days and nights of the Ashura of Zainabiyah. We remember on that tragedy that finally when Yazid the cursed allowed the Ahlul Bayt to leave the city of Sham, that first, as Nu'man ibn Bashir was told that he would take the caravan to Medina, as they began to depart from the city of Sham, Imam Zainul Abidin, he tells the caravan leader, he says, we want to go back to the graveyard of our father, Imam Hussein. They make that detour towards Karbala. As the family begin to approach the Karbala, there's already somebody at the grave. There's already somebody at the grave of Abu Abdullah. Historians mention that there was one Sahabi of Rasulullah, a very prominent man, Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari. Jabir had already turned blind. Jabir could no longer see. He had been with the Prophet in many of the battles. He had been with the Ahlul Bayt through thick and thin. As the caravan are approaching the city of the land of Karbala, as they're about to approach towards the Haram of Imam Hussein, towards the body of Imam Hussein, we see that Jabir, who has already turned blind, he asked his servant Atiyah to take him to the river Furat. Jabir goes to the river. Jabir performs the ghusl. He puts on clean white clothing. He begins to ask Atiyah to help guide him towards the qabr of Imam Hussein. Jabir makes his way towards the grave of Imam Hussein. We're told that Jabir stands at the foot of the grave of Imam. He begins to lament and he greets his Imam with the salams. At one point Jabir collapses. He can't take the pain of separation from his master, from his Mawla Imam Hussein. Eventually Jabir awakes. Jabir comes out of this state. He addresses Imam Hussein. He addresses his master. He says, "Oh Hussein," he says, "Oh my Habib." He says, "Your Habib is calling, but why don't you reply to your friend?" And then Habib, and then he answers himself, and he says, "Of course the Habib cannot answer the Habib because your head has been severed from your body." As Jabir is mentioning this, as Jabir is lamenting over the tragedy of Karbala, we're told that over the horizon he sees somebody coming, and when he realizes, when he's told that from his servant that these people who are coming, the sound that he hears is none other than the family of the Prophet. This is Lady Zainab. This is the family of Rasul who have come to pay their respects to Sayyid al-Shuhada. He begins to distance himself from the grave so that the ladies can come and lament and can grieve over Sayyid al-Shuhada in privacy, and to cry and lament over what happened to Abu Abdullah on the day of Ashura. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إن لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Matam Hussein.